Nazir Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, up your game. Kol haroe Sota b'Kilkula. Today, in understanding some of the principles of Sota, we're going to understand the whole Masechta of Nazir in a revealing way, and a way that gives us some very practical use of the Masechta of Nazir that we've just finished. And as you remember, on the first Daf of Sota, the Gemara goes into the question of why Sota follows on Masechta Nazir, and we'll touch on that and we'll discuss that. But it's interesting that in understanding the relationship and the juxtaposition between Nazir and Sota, both in Shas and in the Chumash, in the Torah, we'll take our understanding of Nazir to another level. The Mishnah says on Daf Zayin that we start getting into the process of what they used to do to this poor woman who is a Sota. And they used to bring her to the main Beis Din at the Mochem Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. We warn her, we introduce severity into the scene in the same way as we do when there are witnesses that are about to give evidence on a capital issue. That's how serious it is. And the Kohen says to her, Biti, my daughter, wine causes all sorts of bad things, all sorts of mischief. Sometimes just laughter and lightness causes all sorts of bad things. Immaturity causes all sorts of bad things. Bad neighbors, just friends, cause all sorts of bad things. Help us make sure that Hashem's name won't get erased in the water, and enable us not to proceed any further with this by admitting to what has been, and then we can sort this all out. The Gemara then says, the Mishnah says, and then we say things to her which she shouldn't even hear, and nobody should hear. And the Gemara says further on, what we tell her is that there were greater people than you that have done wrong and have confessed. Yehuda, Reuven, and one shouldn't talk about people like that, but we do that in order to help her say, yes, I did do it, it was a mistake, I was influenced by bad friends or by wine or by laughter or whatever. And the Tiferes Yisrael says, V'yesh lecha hitnatzlut keshechat. The reason we're saying this to her is you can make an excuse. You can explain yourself. It was wine, it was immaturity, whatever. There's a way out. And we give her a way out, a face-saving way out. That everybody will understand these things happen. But if you're going to insist that you're innocent when in fact you're not, then that's a serious thing and we should try and avoid that. Rabbi Isaac Shiur asks a question. Rabbi Isaac Shiur was a great Rosh Yeshiva and Mashkiach, a Baal Musa already before the war in Europe. He was in Switzerland during the war for medical treatment. That way he was saved. And he came to Eretz Yisrael where he taught Torah in Yerushalayim, in Hebron Yeshiva, and elsewhere he gave Musa shiurim. He was a son-in-law of the Alter of Slabodka. He was married into the Finkel family. He was a very, very important personality, a very fine personality. Died in the 1950s. And he asks, firstly, if all these things could cause a Sota's behavior, as the Mishnah says, why did we learn on Daf Beis that then the Gemara asked, why does Sota follow Nazir? Said Rebbe, that anybody who sees a Sota in her disgrace should become a Nazir from wine. Asks Rabbi Isaac Shiur, why only wine? Why not disassociate from your neighbors, make sure you don't laugh? All these other things that we're told, there are many things that can cause this behavior. Why is wine picked upon? And secondly, it says, Kol haroe Sota b'Kilkula. What does Kilkula mean? Says Rashi, Benivula uvevoshta shemenavlim ota. Anybody who sees a Sota being disgraced, because we do disgrace her. On Daf Zayin Amud Beis and on Daf Ches, we'll learn more about what some of the disgrace is. Asks Rabbi Isaac Shiur, so you see the consequence of what happened to her. Why do you still have to make yourself a Nazir from yain? So you see what happens, it's like you're driving behind somebody who's speeding, and you see a policeman stop them and give them a ticket, you slow down. You don't say, oh well, they did it, I'll do it too. So if the Sota got away with it, I understand. But what you're watching is a Sota b'Kilkula. You're watching her being embarrassed and disgraced. Why would that lead you to difficulty and to weakness to the extent that you've got to become a Nazir? Another question, he doesn't ask it, but I'll add that in. Shekol haroe sota b'kilkula. What is kol haroe? That doesn't mean an ordinary person only. Kol haroe means even the Chofetz Chaim. That even if the Chofetz Chaim sees a sota b'kilkula, he should become a Nazir because it will weaken him otherwise. It's just in human nature. It doesn't matter how great you are. That's the impact. So let's start firstly with the first issue. And that is, if you remember in the whole issue around Amalek, Rashi said, Asher karcha baderech lashon mikre davar acher lashon keri v'tumah, and davar acher lashon kor v'chom, tzinancha v'hifshircha mirtichatcha. What Amalek did was he showed that the Jewish people were not invincible. And that was serious. That's why Hashem is so angry at Amalek and it warns us to be conscious of it and to wipe out his memory. What he did was not just that battle. That was bad enough that he came after the weak people. But he demonstrated the invincibility of the Jewish people, which caused every subsequent battle that we've had and every bit of anti-Semitism. If we would have retained the sense of you can't mess with the Jewish people, we came out of Mitzrayim. Imagine what position we were in after Paro was humiliated, after the Egyptian nation was wiped out because of what they did to the Jewish people. If we could have retained that level, there wouldn't have been all the problems we've suffered from throughout history. And who was responsible for breaking that reputation of invincibility? Amalek. So we see, and there we could ask the same question, but didn't the other nations of the world see what happened to Amalek? How we wiped Amalek out, how Amalek was punished as a result of that? Why don't they learn from the consequence? Because when there's a pritzat geder, when a barrier is broken, the social decline, moral decline is accelerated. It's got nothing to do with understanding the consequence. The fact is something which was never accepted before is now accepted as a norm. That changes the whole of society. We see it happening nowadays. Questions of gender issues and sexual issues and homosexuality and transgenderism, all these things. There are things that they were always there, but they were always a deviation from the norm. And that holds society in check. Once it becomes the norm, there is no check. And it doesn't help that you look at people who are in that situation and you see loneliness and you see depression and you see high suicide rates. That doesn't lead people to say, oh, this is a bad thing, it shouldn't be done. There's still a persistence because the barrier has been broken. What used to be abnormal is now a norm. I remember once seeing an old Jew in Meir Shorim on Friday night. I was working very late and a car drove past. And he said almost under his breath, but he was standing right next to me because we both wanted to cross the road. It was Shabbos, Shabbos. And I said to him, Miman Afshach, if you really mean it, shout it loud, throw a stone, do something. Don't just stand there mumbling Shabbos, Shabbos. I'm the only person who can hear you and I know it's Shabbos. He said, I'm not saying it for you and I'm not saying it for the driver. I'm saying it for me. That this should never be accepted as normal by me. I've got to remember this is Shabbos. It was a lesson I was 17 years old when I saw that. I've never forgotten that. We must never let abnormalities become normal, at least not for us and for our families and for our children. There's got to be a dividing line about what's normal. Once Amalek broke the barrier of invincibility, fighting with the Jews became normal. And once a Sota behaves in this way and you see it, it becomes normal, it becomes feasible, it becomes something which is in the realm of possibility, whereas previously it was in the realm of impossibility. And it doesn't matter if it's you or me, or it doesn't matter if it's that Yid in Meir Shorim so many years ago on Shabbos, and it doesn't matter if it's the Chofetz Chaim. Once you see something and it becomes a kind of a norm in your mind, and that breaks barriers and begins a moral decline that you've got to arrest. And you arrest it by becoming a Nazir. Now let's get into becoming a Nazir. Why? Why only wine? So what we have to understand is that becoming a Nazir, as we learned in many shiurim that we had in Masechta Nazir, we spoke about the fact that a Nazir is not just an ordinary human being who doesn't drink wine, an ordinary human being who doesn't have a haircut for 30 days. That's not what a Nazir is. A Nazir is like Hektish. He himself is like a korban. He changes his status. He used to be an ordinary person, now he's a Nazir. Like you've got an ordinary person and a Kohen, an ordinary person and a Levi. You've got an ordinary person and a Nazir. And a Nazir is a different type of a human being. That's what a Nazir is. One of the ways he expresses that difference is by not drinking wine. We see in the Lashon of the Posuk in Naso, La'avivu limo la'achivu la'achato lo yitzama lahem b'motam ki nezer elokav al rosho. What is Nezer Elokav al Rosho? Says the Ibn Ezra, it means a crown. And the Ibn Ezra, as we'll see in a moment, explains this is a human being who is different, who has separated himself, who acts and thinks and functions differently. That's what a Nazir is. So what does that got to do with not drinking the wine? What it means is, and Rabbi Isaac Sher explains this very beautifully, Rabbi Yerucham Leibovitz explains it as well, that when you take something on, and we'll see in a moment why the wine and why it's important what you take on, but when you take something on, that already changes who you are. Consider for a moment, you've probably all had the experience, if you decide, I'm going to start working out, and whereas previously you weren't working out, and now you go 3, 4, 5 times a week and you work out, you'll notice you start eating more healthy as well. You notice that you start going to sleep at the right times. All sorts of other things happen because your mind is now aware you've taken yourself in check. Or the other way around, you decide you're going to be careful with what you eat. And you find you start exercising a bit more, you start walking a bit more, your body's functioning a little bit better. One thing causes another when you take yourself in check and you master yourself just in one area. Particularly if you choose the right area in which to master yourself. Then it enables a domino effect of self-improvement, of self-development. Self-development has to start with an action. You can't sit and think about self-development. You can't read the how-to books on self-development. That's not going to bring about any changes. What brings about the changes is one change in your life, doing something different. We look at that and understand it, that if we want to raise your level, it's not just about thinking differently, and it's not even just about starting to do something different. I want to raise my level, so I'll be more careful with tznius, I'll be more careful with kashrus, I'll be more careful with my davening. That's all fine, those are good things. But there's a different way of doing it. The Ibn Ezra says, "V'da ki kol b'nei adam avdei ta'avot ha'olam." The ordinary person is enslaved to addiction, different kinds of addiction. But addiction is a form of slavery. We're coming into Pesach now. Pesach is a time to de-link from addiction. That's what Pesach gives us, that opportunity. That's man cherutenu. Let us free ourselves from our own enslavement to addictions. V'hamelech amiti, says the Ibn Ezra, a wonderful Ibn Ezra, a true king. Sheyesh lo nezer va'ateret malchut b'rosho, who wears a crown, who carries himself with the dignity and nobility of royalty. Who is that person? Kol mishu chofshi min ha'ta'avot. Anybody who is free of addiction. Anybody who has self-mastery. Anybody who can say no to himself. Anybody who has control over what he does. That person has a level of independence and freedom that you can sense in the person. It's a midah of malchut. And that's the nezer elokav. That's what a nazir is. And so if we look a little further, there's a posuk in Amos where Amos, the Novi, compares the Nazirim to Nevi'im. And Rashi says there, Tirgem Yonatam. What is a Nazir, says Targum Yonason? Le Malfin. Malfin means a learner and a teacher, from Yalfuta. Shayu Purushim Midarkei Am Haaretz. Like the Ibn Ezra, says Rashi, they lived separately from the ordinary people. V'oskin b'Torah, and they spend their time learning. That's what a Nazir means, somebody who is ennobled himself, somebody who lives in a different way from everybody else, and studies and teaches the Torah. But I want you to appreciate for a moment what his learning and teaching is. And Nazir, why doesn't it just say Talmidei Chachomim? Why doesn't the Novi say V'akim mibneichem linviim u'mibachureichem letalmidei Chachomim? Why Nazirim? What is unique about the learning and teaching of a Nazir? What does the Nazir do? The Nazir goes to the essence of the Sota's behavior. The Nazir notices, I have been exposed to an abnormality which has the danger of becoming, in my mind, a normality. I just saw one woman, it was a Sota, and I saw the consequences, but something that I thought was impossible to conceive of is now in the realm of possibility. A frum, wonderful woman, and she went off the tracks. And this is something I didn't think was possible. Now I see it's possible. What does the Nazir do? Malfin, he learns. What does he do? He learns the event. What's at the root cause of it? The root cause of it is addiction. The root cause is lack of self-mastery. The root cause is just following whatever other people are doing, following one's immature impulses, following an addiction to alcohol, whatever it is. That's the cause of it. So I will correct myself at root cause level. That's the learning and teaching of the Nazir. to look around you, see where the failure of your society is and what lies at the root of that failure. So you can try and develop yourself and correct yourself in that very area of root cause. That's what a Nazir is. And when you're able to do that, you uplift your whole being into what the Ibn Ezra calls Mishu Chavshi Min HaTa'avot, is a person sheyesh lo nezer malchut berosho, that really is wearing an imaginary crown, but one that you can feel, one that you can perceive because of the way this person bears themselves. We're coming into Pesach now, and it's a time that's also important to understand. Pesach is a time of ridding ourselves of addictions. And what do we do on Pesach? We find every possible synthetic way of creating that which we're not supposed to have on Pesach. And people say maybe kitnius should be done away with and we don't need kitnius anymore. And I've often said, and I saw in an article that Rav Rimon wrote a while back, if we had the ability, we should put a whole lot of extra things into the Isra of kitniot. Because the principle of kitniot is don't make artificial things. They're like bread and like cake. The whole idea is just to keep away from that a little bit, just to get back to basics. So to replace the bread and cake with other bread and cake, which happens to be kosher lePesach, we're actually diminishing the whole essence of it. And we go to these wonderful programs for Pesach. One should look around and notice what Pesach should be and is and what Pesach has become. And we should look at the root cause. What is causing that? And each one of us in our own way should try and find a way. All you have to do for self-mastery is start with one thing, like wine for 30 days, not a big deal, but he becomes a Nazir through that. One little sense of self-mastery in one particular area where you're at the root cause of where society is failing. Where is my society failing? Is it integrity in business? Is it honesty? Is it chesed? Is it lashon hara? Where's my society failing? That's like the sota. You've got to get to the root cause and say, this is where I'm afraid of being influenced. This is where everybody's taking things for granted and it's become vochedi, it's become normal. And I want to retain the sense that it isn't normal. And do one thing, and do one thing, take yourself in mastery and in control, and do one thing that's a little different where you're in control and you're mastery, and thereby elevate yourself into that, so that we understand that this extra level of Torah observance is not about just taking on a new practice randomly, but it's about becoming a different person, a person who has mastery of self and nobility and royalty, as the Ibn Ezra says.